Hello everyone, you are on the channel Scary Story. Today I'm going to tell you a story about an old, forgotten grave and the chilling secret it held. Our story begins with Leo, a history student who loved spending his weekends exploring old, abandoned places. He wasn't a ghost hunter or anything like that. He was just fascinated by the stories that old buildings and forgotten sites could tell. One crisp autumn afternoon, he stumbled upon a small, overgrown cemetery he'd never seen before, tucked away deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It wasn't on any map he'd ever consulted. The iron gate was rusted open, and most of the headstones were so worn by time and weather that the names were unreadable. It felt like a place the world had left behind. As he wandered through the tangled weeds and crumbling stones, one particular grave caught his eye. It was set apart from the others, under the shadow of a large gnarled oak tree. The headstone was simpler than the rest, a plain slab of granite, but what was strange was that it was remarkably well preserved. There was no name, no date, just a single cryptic inscription etched into the stone. Where the shadow falls, the truth is buried. Leo was intrigued. It sounded like a riddle. He looked up at the oak tree. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the cemetery. He noticed that the shadow of the tallest branch of the oak tree was pointing directly at the base of the headstone. Kneeling down, he brushed away the dirt and fallen leaves. His fingers found a slight indentation in the ground, a patch of earth that felt softer, more disturbed than the surrounding area. Curiosity getting the better of him, he returned to his car and grabbed a small hand trowel he kept for his amateur archaeological digs. He started digging carefully at the spot. It didn't take long before his trowel hit something hard with a dull thud. It wasn't rock, it was metal. He dug faster, his heart starting to pound with a mixture of excitement and a strange sense of unease. He soon uncovered the lid of a small, rusted metal box. It was locked with an old-fashioned padlock, so corroded it looked like it might crumble at a touch. With a bit of effort, he managed to break the lock. He lifted the heavy lid, his breath catching in his throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not treasure or bones, but a single, leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked and dry, but the book was otherwise intact. He carefully lifted it out. The pages were filled with elegant, looping handwriting. The ink was faded, but still legible. Back in his apartment, under the warm glow of his desk lamp, Leo began to read. The journal belonged to a man named Elias, and the first entry was dated over a century ago. Elias described himself as the town's doctor. He wrote about his life, his patients, and the quiet, ordinary happenings of a small, forgotten community. But as Leo read further, the tone of the journal began to change. Elias wrote about a strange illness that had started to spread through the town. It began with nightmares, vivid and terrifying, that left people exhausted and fearful. Then came the physical symptoms, a creeping weakness, a pale complexion, and a strange, vacant look in their eyes. Elias was baffled. He'd never seen anything like it. He tried every remedy he knew, but nothing worked. The townspeople grew weaker, and one by one they began to pass away in their sleep. A sense of panic and despair filled the pages of the journal. Elias wrote about the funerals, how the small cemetery on the hill began to fill up. He felt helpless, a failure as a doctor, watching his community wither away before his eyes. The town was consumed by grief and fear. They started to suspect a curse, a dark presence haunting them. Then the journal took a much darker turn. Elias started to notice something strange about the bodies of the deceased. There were no visible marks, no signs of disease he could identify, but he described a subtle, almost imperceptible change in them. He became obsessed with finding the cause, staying up late into the night, studying his medical books and conducting discreet examinations that he kept secret from the grieving families. One night, he wrote about a chilling discovery. He had been examining the body of a young woman who had recently passed. As he was about to finish, he noticed two tiny, almost invisible puncture marks on her neck, hidden beneath her hair. He had dismissed similar marks on others as insect bites, but now, seeing them again, a horrifying suspicion began to form in his mind. He remembered the old folklore his grandmother used to tell him. Tales of creatures that fed on the life force of the living. Creatures that walked in the night. He had always dismissed them as childish stories. But now, faced with a plague he couldn't explain, and a town that was slowly dying, he started to wonder. The journal entries became more frantic. Elias described his growing conviction that something unnatural was preying on his town. He wrote about a newcomer, a charismatic and wealthy gentleman who had moved into the old manor on the outskirts of town shortly before the illness began. The man, named Alistair, kept to himself, was rarely seen during the day, and was known for his unsettling, piercing eyes. The townspeople were initially charmed by him, but Elias was deeply suspicious. Elias decided to investigate. He began secretly watching the manor at night. In one terrifying entry, he described seeing Alistair leaving the manor long after midnight, moving with an unnatural speed and grace through the woods. Elias followed him, his heart pounding in his chest all the way to the cemetery. He watched in horror from behind a tree as Alistair knelt by a fresh grave, the grave of the very woman Elias had just examined. Elias couldn't see what he was doing, but the sight filled him with a dreadful certainty. He knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Who would believe him? They would think he had gone mad with grief. He was on his own. The journal then detailed his desperate plan. He spent days researching ancient texts and folklore, searching for a way to fight a creature he could barely believe existed. He learned about weaknesses, about rituals, about the things that could harm such a being. The final entries were a detailed account of his preparations. He forged a stake from the iron of a church bell and gathered holy water. He wrote a final, heartbreaking letter to a brother he hadn't seen in years. A letter he knew he would never be able to send. He was going to confront Alistair at his resting place during the day, when the creature was at its most vulnerable. The very last entry was short and hastily scrawled. He is not in the manor. The earth in the cellar is disturbed. I know where he sleeps. If I do not return, know that I tried to save them. Let my grave be a warning. Where the shadow falls, the truth is buried. The truth is that evil is real, and it sleeps beneath the ground. Leo closed the journal, his hands trembling. The story felt so real, so vivid. Elias wasn't a character in a book. He was a real man, a doctor who had sacrificed himself to save his town from a horror no one else would believe. The Forgotten Cemetery wasn't just a collection of old stones. It was the final resting place of a community that had been hunted, and the grave, without a name, it was Elias's. He had arranged for his own burial, leaving behind the journal and the riddle as his only testament, a final warning. Leo looked out his window. The sun had set, and the world was dark. The story of the forgotten grave and the brave doctor had changed something in him. The world suddenly seemed a little bigger, a little stranger, and filled with stories far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. He knew he would never look at an old, abandoned place the same way again. Sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones, the ones that have been buried and forgotten by time. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Scary Story for more chilling tales. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe.